Welcome to Revenge Vine. My mother slid a folder across the kitchen table on Christmas Eve and said, "Sign this tonight, or don't come back to this house." 53 years old, and she still knew exactly how to make a room go silent. There were 11 people sitting around that table. My aunt, my uncle, 3 cousins, my grandmother in her usual chair by the window, my brother's girlfriend, who had only been dating him for 4 months and looked like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper, and my brother. My younger brother Daniel, who was sitting right next to my mother, not saying a single word, with a small smile on his face that I will never forget for the rest of my life. The folder had my name on it, written in my mother's handwriting. Not typed. Handwritten, in blue pen, in her careful cursive. Like she'd been planning this for a long time and wanted it to feel personal. I didn't open it right away. I looked at my mother first. She had that expression I had seen my entire life. The one that said, "This is already decided. I am just waiting for you to catch up." My father was at the end of the table. He didn't look at me. He was looking at his plate. I opened the folder. It was a loan agreement. For $54,000. In my name. Already filled out. The borrower line had my full legal name, Claire Renee Whitfield, typed in, not handwritten. Someone had taken the time to type it. The lender was listed as my parents. The purpose line said, "Business Startup Capital, Daniel M. Whitfield." And at the bottom, on the signature line for the borrower, there was a small yellow sticky arrow pointing to the blank space. Like I was signing a lease for an apartment. Like this was routine. I read it twice. I looked up. "You already put my name on it," I said. My mother said, "We need you to make it official." I want to pause here and give you the context you need, because if I just tell you what happened next without the background, it won't make sense. And it needs to make sense, because this wasn't a single night. This was 31 years. I am the oldest of 2 children. Daniel is 4 years younger than me. Growing up, the dynamic in our house was something I didn't have a name for until I was in my mid-20s and started reading about family systems. My parents loved both of us. I genuinely believe that. But they loved us very differently. Daniel was the one they worried about, which in our family translated into the one they protected, which over time translated into the one they built their entire financial and emotional infrastructure around. I was the one who was fine. I was always fine. When I got a scholarship to state school, my parents said how wonderful, and then spent the next 4 years asking me to help pay Daniel's private school tuition because he had potential that needed nurturing. I was working 20 hours a week at a coffee shop. I was 19. I said yes, because I thought that was what family did. When I graduated and got a job as a junior accountant at a firm in Charlotte, my parents asked if I could cover Daniel's car insurance because he was between jobs. He was between jobs for 11 months. I covered it for 9 of them. When I got promoted at 27 and moved into my own apartment, a 1-bedroom, I was extremely proud of my mother, called me within the week, and said Daniel was having trouble making rent, and could I help just this one time. I helped 4 times that year. I am not telling you this to make myself sound like a martyr. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that by the time I was 31 years old, sitting at that Christmas Eve table, I had quietly transferred somewhere in the range of $22,000 to my family over the course of a decade. Not in one dramatic gesture. In small amounts. In yeses, I said, because I didn't know how to say no without feeling like I was failing at being a daughter. And I had never once asked for any of it back. Now my mother was asking me to sign a $54,000 loan agreement so my brother could open a sports bar. A sports bar. I set the folder down. I kept my voice very even. I had learned from years of these conversations that the moment I raised my voice, the conversation became about my reaction instead of the actual issue. I said, "Walk me through why my name is on this." My mother said that my credit score was excellent, and she said it like a compliment, like she was proud of me for having good credit, like that was the reason she had raised me, and that Daniel's credit was not in a place where he could secure the loan on his own. She said that the bank had told them a co-signer with strong credit history would make the loan possible. She said that this was an investment in the family, and that Daniel had a solid business plan, and that it would all be paid back within 3 years. I said, Has anyone asked me before tonight? Silence. My uncle cleared his throat. One of my cousins looked at her phone. My father, still looking at his plate, said, Claire, it's Christmas. Like the date was relevant. Like the presence of a wreath on the door meant I was supposed to nod and sign. I looked at Daniel. He still had that small smile. He said, I really think this is going to work, Claire. I've done the research. I said, Daniel, you have never held a job for more than 2 years. The smile went away. My mother stood up. Not dramatically, she didn't knock her chair back or raise her voice. She simply stood up, very deliberately, and said, Claire, we have supported you your entire life. We paid for things you have never even acknowledged. This family has always come together when someone needed help. Your brother needs help. We are asking you, as his sister, as our daughter, to be part of this family. I want you to notice what she did there. She reframed the entire conversation. Suddenly the question wasn't whether I should sign a $54,000 loan agreement I had never been consulted about. The question was whether I was willing to be part of this family. If I said no to the loan, I was saying no to the family. The loan and my belonging were now the same thing. I had seen this move before. I just hadn't ever had the language to name it until that moment. I picked up the folder. I looked at it one more time. I looked at the signature line with the little yellow arrow. I put the folder back down on the table. I pushed it gently back across toward my mother. I stood up, took my coat from the back of my chair, and said one sentence before I walked to the door. I'll tell you what it was in a moment. But first, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. I said, I hope Daniel's business plan covers what happens when the co-signer files to have her name removed. My mother's face did something I had never seen it do before. It went completely still, not angry, not sad. Still, like a screen that had just lost its signal. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it the way you close a door when you're leaving for the last time, and you want to do it with dignity. It was 6:47 inches the evening on Christmas Eve. I drove to a gas station 2 miles from my parents' house, sat in the parking lot, and called my best friend Maya. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, Claire, come over. I have lasagna. I went to Maya's. I ate lasagna. I did not cry until I was in her guest bathroom, and then I cried for about 4 minutes. And then I washed my face and went back out and we watched a movie. That was the last time I cried about any of this. Here's what I did in the first 72 hours. The next morning, Christmas Day, I called my bank. I explained that my family had been attempting to use my credit and personal information as part of a loan application without my prior consent, and that I wanted a fraud alert placed on my account and my credit file. The representative walked me through the process. It took 22 minutes. I also called all 3 credit bureaus and placed a security freeze. If anyone tried to open any credit line using my information, it would be blocked until I personally unfroze it. I then called a financial attorney not that day, because it was Christmas, but I had her name from when I'd helped a colleague with a contract issue 2 years prior. I left a voicemail. She called me back on the 26th. I explained the situation. She told me that because I had not actually signed the document, my liability was 0. She also told me that if my parents had in any way already submitted documentation with my name on it, even preliminary paperwork, I had options. I asked her to tell me what those options were. She did. I took notes. I did not block my family's numbers. I want to be clear about that. I did not block them because I needed to know what they were saying. Information is protection. The calls started Christmas morning. My mother called 4 times before noon. I did not answer. She left one voicemail. It was 2 minutes and 40 seconds long. She said she was hurt and confused, and that she didn't understand why I had reacted the way I did, and that I had embarrassed her in front of the family, and that she hoped I would take some time to think about what kind of daughter I wanted to be. What kind of daughter I wanted to be. I saved that voicemail. I saved all of them. My father called once on the 26th. His voicemail was 40 seconds. He said, Claire, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Call me when you're ready to talk. He sounded tired. He has always sounded tired. I think carrying the weight of pretending everything is fine is genuinely exhausting, and I say that without sarcasm. I feel something close to sad for him, even now. Daniel called on the 27th. He did not leave a voicemail. He texted instead. The text said, "You really did that on Christmas. To Mom. Great job." I screenshotted it and did not respond. My aunt, my mother's sister, called on the 28th. I almost didn't answer, but she had always been kinder to me than the rest of them, so I picked up. She said she wasn't calling to take sides. She said she was calling because she was worried. I told her, calmly, exactly what had happened. I told her about the folder with my name already typed in. I told her about the loan amount. I told her about my mother's statement about what kind of daughter I wanted to be. My aunt was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Claire, I didn't know the details." I believed her. She called my mother later that day. I know this because my mother texted me that night the first text she'd sent, and it said, "I see you've been talking to people about our private family business." I did not respond to that either. The new year came. I went back to work. I was a senior accountant at this point, handling 3 mid-size corporate clients, and I was good at my job in the way that I had always been good at every job I'd held quietly, consistently, without needing applause. My manager had mentioned a potential promotion to financial controller before the holidays. I made sure that nothing happening in my personal life was visible at work. I was professional. I was present. On January 9th, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I had been half expecting a call from the bank or the attorney. It was Daniel. He was calling from someone else's phone because he knew I would see his name and not pick up. When I realized it was him, I almost hung up. But I didn't. I let him talk. He said the loan had fallen through. He said the bank had flagged the application because of the fraud alert on my account. He said he had lost the deposit he'd put down on the commercial space he'd been planning to lease. He said this was my fault. I said, "Daniel, you put my name on a loan document without asking me. What did you think was going to happen?" He said, "I thought you were my sister." I said, "I am your sister. I'm also a person whose name and credit belong to her, not to you." He hung up. I sat with that for a while. Not with guilt. I want to be honest with you about that. I had moved through guilt, and out the other side. What I sat with was something more like grief. Grief for the version of this family I had spent 31 years trying to believe in. Grief for every Christmas I had smiled through. Grief for every time I had written a check and told myself this was love. It wasn't love. It was an arrangement. And I had been the only one who didn't know the terms. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. My mother made 2 more attempts at contact, one in February, a long letter she mailed to my apartment, which I read once and filed, and one in March, a call she made on my birthday that I let go to voicemail. The voicemail was warm. She said she missed me. She said she hoped I was doing well. She said the door was always open. I noticed that she did not apologize in either communication. Not for the folder. Not for the yellow arrow pointing to my signature line. Not for the phrase, "What kind of daughter you want to be." The door was open. But she hadn't examined what she'd done to make me walk through it in the first place. My father sent a text in April. 2 sentences. "I heard you turned down the promotion. I hope things are okay." I don't know where he got the idea that I'd turned down anything. The promotion had actually come through in March. I was now financial controller. I had said yes without hesitation. I think my mother had told him I was struggling. I think she needed the story to work that way. The thing I want to tell you, the part that matters, is what I found on the other side of all of it. I had more money than I'd had in years. That sounds crass, but it's true, and I think it's important to say. The constant low-level bleeding of my finances had stopped. The $200 here, and the $400 there, and the just this once. That was never just once, it had stopped. My savings account grew in a way it never had before. I paid off the last of my student loans in June. I took a solo trip to Portugal in August, the first real vacation I had taken in 5 years. I sat at a restaurant in Lisbon and ordered whatever I wanted and paid for it with my own money, and did not feel guilty about a single bite. That sounds small. It was enormous. But here is the part I didn't expect. In September, my aunt, the one who had called me after Christmas, reached out again. Not about my mother. She said she had been thinking about what I'd told her and that she wanted to have lunch. We met at a restaurant near her office. She told me that she had watched my mother for 40 years, and that what had happened on Christmas Eve was not an accident and not a first time. She said, "You were never going to be enough, Claire. No matter what you gave. I think you knew that. I think you've always known that." I had known that. I had known it the way you know something you're not ready to say out loud. I drove home from that lunch and sat in my car for 10 minutes in the parking garage. Not crying. Just sitting. Just letting it settle into all the spaces where the old version of the story used to live. In October, I found out through my aunt that Daniel's sports bar idea had been abandoned entirely. He had found a new plan, something involving a food truck, apparently. My mother was helping him draft a proposal for a small business grant. I felt nothing in particular when I heard this. That was how I knew I had actually moved on. Not because I felt happy about it, because I felt nothing. Neutral. Like reading about weather in a city I had no plans to visit. I did not go home for Thanksgiving. I went to Maya's instead. Her mother makes sweet potato pie from scratch, and her stepfather tells the same 3 jokes every year, and her younger sister brought a boyfriend who was clearly terrified, and I sat at their table and laughed more than I had laughed in a long time. Maya's mother pulled me aside at the end of the night and said, "We're glad you're here." 4 words. I had to look at the ceiling for a second. Here's what I want to say to you before I go. I spent a very long time believing that being part of my family meant making myself smaller and smaller until I fit the space they needed me to fill. The responsible one, the capable one, the one who was fine, the one whose credit score was excellent. I thought that was love. I thought giving without being asked was what good daughters do. What I know now is that love doesn't have a signature line. It doesn't come with a folder already filled out. It doesn't wait until Christmas Eve in front of 11 witnesses to ask for something it should have discussed months ago. It doesn't tell you that signing a document you never agreed to is a test of what kind of daughter you want to be. I forgave my family. I want to be honest about that too, because I think people sometimes hear I walked away and assume that means I am full of anger. I'm not full of anger. I let that go because carrying it was heavy, and I am tired of carrying heavy things for people who are not carrying anything for me. But forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same word. I used to think they were. I know better now. The door to my life is open. It always has been. But walking through it requires something my family has not yet been willing to do, which is to sit down, look at what happened, and say not the door is always open, but I see what I did and I understand why you left. Maybe that day will come. Maybe it won't. Either way, I am Claire Renee Whitfield. I am 31 years old. I am a financial controller. I have a 1-bedroom apartment I love. I have a best friend who makes space for me at her family's table. I went to Portugal. I paid off my loans. My credit score is excellent, and it belongs to me. If you've ever been the one in your family who was always fine, always capable, always the one they came to, I see you. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to leave a folder unsigned on a table and walk out of a room with your coat on and your head up. They will call it selfish. They will ask what kind of daughter you want to be. You can want to be the kind of daughter who is also a person. Those 2 things are not in conflict. If this story felt familiar to you, leave a comment and tell me. I read every single one. And if you're new here, welcome to Revenge Vine. I'm glad you're here.